Okay, folks, sailing prepper here. Well, I'm going to talk about something that does get to me a little. We're going to talk about Russia. And we're going to talk because I hear this both from Democrats and Republicans. First and foremost, it's not true. Russia is not a communist country. That ended in December 26, 1991. Okay? Now, let's actually get into detail why we call them a communist country. Okay? And we're going to do a little history lesson here. The year was 1942. Okay? America just got attacked by Japan. Pearl Harbor. Okay? We went into the war for starting with that reason. There's no dispute on that, by the way. Now, during that time, America, when Russia was still a communist state, America actually did a lot of propaganda about how Russia was good. Believe it or not, we actually had Hollywood movies and Hollywood shows and ads and things saying how Russia was good. Now, these are very hard to find, but you can still find them if you look hard enough. Okay? All types of videos about Russia on the World War II time. You can find them. They're hard to find because they've pretty much been deleted because of the Cold War. Now, after World War II, or actually, to digress to this one, during World War II, we had this thing with the Japanese and the Germans where we put everybody to work, okay, and making weapons. It, one, helped bring us back from the Great Depression, all right, that we just had. So, we had this massive weapons manufacturing thing going on for the war effort. Women got involved. We can do it too. You know, that whole little thing you might have seen from World War II. Now, after World War II, we had all these major companies, kind of like what we have today with Lockheed Martin, Boeing, and Raytheon. These were war manufacturers, okay? And they paid lobbyists like they do today. So, they needed a new enemy. It became Russia. Now, shortly after World War II, Russia was trying to rebuild their economy. And we had this thing called McCarthyism going on in the United States. McCarthyism really happened because people had these little groups and their jobs that they were trying to bring together called unions. Now, there were some bad things with unions, like being run by the mob and things like that, but unions, for the most part, were to protect workers, okay? Workers' rights. If you're a worker, their idea was to give you bigger raises and make sure that you were protected so that, you know, things wouldn't happen, like your company neglecting things, like a faulty wire or a dangerous thing that would actually endanger the health and livelihood of their workers, which is where OSHA comes in. Now, because of this, okay, our governments didn't like it because companies had lobbyists. And the war manufacturers needed an enemy because, well, for them to continue to do business, they needed lobbyists. Okay? And they needed money and they needed a reason. So the two together brought up the Cold War. Okay? Now, during this time, a lot of innocent Americans that were fighting to be unionized, a lot of innocent Americans that just wanted better rights for themselves, shoot, his name's on the top of my head. The rights that black people were fighting for, they were considered communists. Okay, matter of fact, the FBI actually called Martin Luther King Martin Luther King a communist. And that's a fact. They actually declared him a communist. And all he wanted was fair rights for African Americans. Okay? So a lot of people lost their jobs, were blacklisted, kicked out of the country for being communists, when, by the way, according to our laws, our rules, it's not illegal to be a communist. But our government doesn't care about that. If you go back to 1942, just for a matter of fact, when we go to digress back to that, and I'm using that word more often now apparently, to go back to that, the Japanese Americans were put in concentration camps. We called it internment camps. Same thing. Okay? The conditions were horrible, and it wasn't, we care about your rights, it was right this way. Just to quote George Carlin on that one. Okay? So, now you have that going on. You had the Cold War that went on all the way through the 80s. All right? Now, go a little farther. Like I said, 1991. You might have remembered this phrase. Gorbachev knocked down that wall. Well, guess what, folks? That was the end of Russia being communists. So they're not communists. And during the whole Cold War, they weren't even doing anything to us. They were just trying to bring back their country, which we found out later. It wasn't really talked about too much because it was ingrained into our structure. You know, bad Russia. Well, Russia's never actually done anything to us, and they've never actually been bad to anybody. Okay? And all this stuff that's been going on has been made up. Give you another example. Okay? Go a little faster. Okay? We've actually been friendly with Russia since 1991, right up until Donald Trump went into office. Well, I'm sorry, Hillary Clinton needed a scapegoat. We call it Russiagate now. And I call it McCarthyism 0.20. Sorry, folks, but that's the way it was. Probably one of the few elections we actually had that were legitimate were when he was originally elected. I'm going to tell you why I believe that one election out of all the elections we've had in years was legitimate. Okay? First of all, you could argue the point, and no one blocked you. There was no censorship on arguing the point if Trump should be a president or not. Two, the Democrats believed that they didn't really have to go all out on Donald Trump because they considered him a joke. And they lost. So, they decided to use Russiagate, McCarthyism 2.0. Problem is Democrats and Republicans still go after Russia, which has done absolutely nothing to us. Now, we have pushed Russia, okay? I'll give you an example in the last few years. We actually chased with our fighter pilots a civilian plane that we were trying to force to the ground on Russia territory with a Russian politician into a crash landing into the ground. We actually did that in Russian airspace. Now there was a thing, I believe it was called the free air policy or whatever it was. It was a law, an agreement, or whatever you want to call it, a partial treaty signed, minus all our sanctions to Russia, that actually stated that, you know, they could fly over us, we could fly over them peacefully, not trying to force other planes to the ground, and spy on each other or look at each other as much as we wanted. And we could do that to them, and they could do that to us. So later on after that, I was told, well, Russia flew over our Alaskan airspace. They're right, because they had that treaty until Trump tried to rip it up. Not a fan of Trump, but I'm also not a fan of Biden either. I don't like Democrats or Republicans, to be honest with you. I don't have a big major problem with them as individuals, as I meet them person to person, but as a whole, yeah, I don't like either of the parties. Okay? Now, beyond that, okay, Russia, after 1991, when they said we're no longer going to be communists, let's be friends, all that other stuff, just your oh, I forgot what it's called. It's where all the our militaries go up with the European Union, and Trump's been saying they don't pay their dues, and we're getting out of it and all that. Well, here's the thing with this, okay? The idea of that was that was against Russia, the old Russia, the communist Russia, and the agreement was you would no longer encroach on Russia territory or threaten us or do your little war games threatening us. Well, what do you think it is when you bring tanks, bombs, and weapons right on their borders and do the little war games and keep it increasing and encroaching on their territory? It's really threatening to them. We kind of do the same thing with China, which we shouldn't. Okay? Now, we say communism is bad. I look at it this way. Whether it's for us or not, it really, all it is a different way to do business, if you really think about it. Totalitarianism, Marxism, all those are just different ways people get paid and how they're supported and how they're supposed to survive. If people like it that way, then so be it. If they don't, then so be it. If they want a democratic thing or whatnot, or a socialist party, that's up to the people in power and the people of the people that were there. And it's why should I care if they're communists or not? I don't live there. Do you? And I'm not a member of Russia's people. I'm not Russian. I have Russian descent, but that doesn't make me Russian. I'm still American, unfortunately. However, you know, why should I care? It's just how they do business. That's up to them. Okay? If it fails, if it succeeds, that's up to them. Why do you care? But they're not. They're democratic. Sorry, guys. Sorry to spoil your bubble. And the fact that they have become a democratic society since 1991, December 26, 1991, you can actually research that on Google. It will tell you. Yeah. Don't believe me? Just research it on Google. Now, another little thing. Okay? We are not a democratic society. The United States is not democratic. Not in the least. We say we are, but we're not. If you haven't been paying attention in the last year, since 2008 for that matter, we haven't been a Democratic party government, if not even before then. What tells you that? Well, let's start with 2008. Okay? 2008, we had the major collapse. Who was bailed out? Banks. Not the individuals that were being hurt, just the banks. What did the banks do? Well, they made it legal to do what they were doing before, which was illegal, which was buying their own stuff, which basically tells me we bail out corporations and banks. We don't bail out people. So we have a half socialism, half democratic society. Socialism for the rich, democratic for all us poor people, the hardworking stiffs like me and you, and some of you that aren't working anymore for that matter, especially since COVID. You know, the poor people. Okay? That's who gets the democratic part. We have to struggle. And they push us out of business. And I'll give you an example. Woman, just a few weeks ago, was on the news. She had a restaurant, California. They closed her down. Right across the street, a major corporation for Hollywood opened up a bigger restaurant and weren't following any of the policies. But they closed her down because she was unsafe. No, they closed her down because she's a small business and she was taking money away from the major corporation that was open across the street, and they used COVID as an excuse. And you know what? They're doing that to a lot of small businesses, small mom and pops. That's socialism for the rich. I'm not going to say socialism's a bad thing. To some extent, some socialism's fine. Like welfare system. Welfare system is a socialist system. It's to help out those that are needing of it or supposed to. It doesn't do a very good job at it. If we actually had the proper combination between a socialism and a democratic establishment, then we would have like a system to help out the poor when really they need it. We wouldn't be bailing out the rich when they don't. Okay? Some socialist policies in the right direction should be for the poor, and then the rest should all be democratic to actually stimulate business and growth. And we shouldn't have a too big to fail, because if you have a too big to fail, that's socialism. All right, I think I've made my point on all accounts. Sailing Prepper, signing out.